Here's a hot take for you. Renting is for the rich, and the concept of renting is designed to benefit the wealthy. This is why you have people such as Grant Cardone saying things such as,
buying a house, worst investment you'll ever make in your entire life. It's one of the worst investments in the history of mankind. Now, people are gonna say like, oh, rent's expensive. Yeah, okay, so what? So what? Whole Foods is expensive.
And why you have people such as Ramit Sethi saying things such as,
I'm a multimillionaire and I rent my house. And I've made more money renting than I would have owning a place.
That is because now they're in a financial position where it's more beneficial for them to be renting than it is for them to be owning. But the majority of Americans, the majority of them, they rent not because they want to, they rent because they have to. We have to really start talking about why they're promoting this idea of skipping out on home ownership in exchange to be renting. And why is the media suddenly now pushing a narrative that it is more beneficial to be renting and home ownership doesn't make sense financially, yet although major institutions currently right now are buying up residential real estate. Let's make it make sense. I'm going to use real life examples to break down the other side that they do not talk about when it comes to renting versus buying. When does it actually make sense to rent? When does it actually make sense to buy? Who wins in the long term? And what things should you consider when you are making this decision? I'm Jaleel. I'm a real estate investor with almost 10 years of experience, and I'm a licensed real estate agent based in New York. On my channel, I make videos on my real estate, finances, and a lot more. So if you like this type of content, I suggest that you subscribe. Now let's get into it. I have watched a ton of videos on YouTube talking about which is better when it comes to renting versus buying, and for some reason they always leave out some important details that makes the decision favor one over the other. But in today's video, we're going to discuss that. To make this a fair video, let's quickly discuss some of the pros when it comes to renting and some of the pros when it comes to owning. Let's start with renting. Flexibility. Flexibility when it comes to renting has to be one of the major pros, because the concept that you could just really get up and leave whenever you want to once your lease ends is pretty clutch. So if you wanted to leave for a bigger space, for a better neighborhood, for a better school district, whatever the case may be, more amenities, you could essentially do that with a lot more ease than you could when it comes to owning a home. Less responsibility. When it comes to renting, you have a lot less responsibility than the homeowner does when it comes to the four walls of that apartment or that home. Because if the roof had a leak or the boiler was to break, you really don't have to be the one to fix it, the homeowner does. So you have a lot less to worry about when it comes to the major maintenance or repairs of that building. All you really have to do is to put in a request to have it fixed. It's a lot easier. Also, when it comes to renting, it's a lot easier to get an apartment than it is to get a home. There's a lot less documents, a lot less paperwork, and in some cases, there's a lot less upfront cost. Because if you're renting, you're putting down maybe 3 ways: the first month's security deposit and possibly a broker's fee, depending on where you live. Versus if you're buying a home, you're talking about 5 to 20% down. So yes, it's a little bit easier when it comes to renting than it is when it comes to home ownership. And last but not least, opportunity cost. Now this is the favorite metric they like to use when it comes to saying that renting is better than owning. And I'm gonna do a deep dive on this later, but for now we'll say it's a pro, because essentially what they're saying is that you could take the difference in the amount that you save from renting than you do owning and use that money to invest into the stock market for greater returns. Now let's debunk some of these myths that they use to say that renting is definitely the better option to home ownership. And the first one is maintenance, because renters don't have to pay to fix anything. That is technically true, and the reason you have to pay to fix anything is because it's already included in your rent. It's already been factored in by the homeowner how much money they'll need for future repairs. So technically you're not coming out of pocket up front. However, yes, you kind of are paying for it. Now here's the other part of it that I have to be honest about, and the truth is a lot of renters are renting what they can get, not what they actually want.
Welcome back to Redecorating a Bronx Apartment, because we're too broke to leave. Because there have been so many issues in the apartment. I mean, we've been in this apartment for 8 years. I only paid $2,000 and it's a 2-bedroom apartment. And if you haven't noticed, I have a pretty big apartment. And so that's why we're also not trying to leave. Because if you try to leave right now in New York, you have to pay probably like $10,000, and I don't got that.
So a lot of renters unfortunately are living in subpar apartments where everything isn't pristine. So the concept that you rent an apartment and you suddenly get everything fixed whenever you make a phone call, we know it's not true. A lot of renters are living in with conditions that they would like fixed, but the owner isn't responding, or they just don't do a good job and the tenant ends up doing it themselves anyway. Opportunity cost. Now I might hurt some feelings with this one, but we have to do a deep dive on this. This is the one that they use to really drive home the fact that they think that renting is better than home ownership, with the idea that the money that you save from renting, you can invest the difference into the stock market, which is interesting because the majority of Americans do not have $500 saved up for an emergency fund, yet alone to be investing inside the market. So the idea that they will have not only the discipline, but those additional funds to invest in the market, I don't think it's that accurate. Now you know what, let's put that to the side. In most of these videos, what they usually say is, let's say the house is $500,000 and you're putting down a down payment of 20%, which is $100,000. If you were to take that $100,000 from the time the person bought the home and you instead invested it into the stock market, you could have made, let me stop you right there. That is completely misleading and it throws everything off because it's simply just not what happens. Now, this is a very misleading way to describe opportunity cost, because essentially what you're saying is that they're going to take the entire $100,000 and put it into the market at one time. 99% of people would not take that entire down payment or the $100,000 and put it into the market at one time. No way, that does not happen. What they would have done would be investing small amounts of that money over time, not just at one lump sum to then generate these outrageous profits that you wouldn't have really had. Think about it. The reason that you have the $100,000 or that entire down payment is because you are saving with the goal of buying a house. Otherwise, the concept of investing is to continuously invest over time, not to save up a bunch of money and then dump into the market at one time. This really skews the data when they're talking about opportunity costs when it comes to renting versus buying. Those numbers don't make sense. It's not an apples to apples comparison. Fair way to do this would be to say, I'm saving this amount of money for a house. I'm going to invest it into the market step by step, month by month. Not I wait 10 years, I get $100,000 and now I'm comparing $100,000 to when somebody purchased a home. No, that just doesn't make sense. And then if we were to talk about opportunity cost, it goes both ways because there's opportunity cost to home ownership as well. There's equity. In the same time that you are building up this wealth and you are living inside this home, you are building equity that you can then pull from to use to purchase other investments such as rental properties. There's also the tax benefits, depreciation, interest write-offs. There are opportunity costs on both ends, renting and buying. Housing costs. Now this is another one where the argument is made that housing costs continue to go up, specifically taxes and insurance, while rent stays somewhat fixed. And this is partially true. Yes, I do agree. Taxes and insurance go up throughout the years, so it changes your monthly payment. However, rent doesn't exactly stay the same forever, right? And if we're talking about compounding, rent compounds at a higher rate than home ownership. Because if you think about it, let's say you're paying $3,500 a month for rent, and at the end of your lease, they decide to increase your rent by 4%. So now your rent will be $3,640. However, when that lease ends, it's not gonna be 4% of $3,500 again. It's going to be 4% of that $3,640. And every time after that, your rent is compounded based on the last amount that you paid. That is a dangerous place to be in. Our salary does not increase at the same rate at which rent prices have been increasing. So if you continue to pay 2 to 3 to 4 to 5% for a rent bump every time, every year, eventually you will be hurting because your salary is not catching up to what you are now paying in rent. So you go from paying 30% of your income to then paying 50% of your income. Now, when does renting actually make sense? Now, this is the question that people really need to ask themselves. It only makes sense when the value that you are getting is considerably higher than what you would get for owning a home. Not break even, but I think considerably higher. The other part of it is if you are very self-aware and you know that you do not want to be the person to handle contractors, calling people to come fix things, then yes, owning a home may not be for you. If you don't want to lift up the phone to call a plumber to fix the leak, fine. You want to just lift up the phone to call the property management group to handle everything? Because the only difference really is if you're renting, you're calling one person to fix all things. If you own the home, you have to call multiple people to fix different things. Essentially, it's not that much different. However, if that is one of the reasons that you do not want to own a home, then yes, consider renting. So the question is, when does renting make more sense than home ownership? That's what a lot of people need to focus on because a lot of it is lifestyle related, not necessarily finances, especially if you have the choice between renting and buying. If you only have the choice of renting because you can't afford home ownership, then obviously you have to rent. It makes more sense when you're getting a considerable amount of value, more than you would if you were to purchase that same home. Or let's say, for example, you wanted a ton of amenities that you must have, whether that's a rooftop deck, a pool, a gym, a sauna, a game room, an office to rent out. In that case, it would probably cost a lot of money to put all of that in one home. So in that sense, yes, paying the premium for rent makes more sense. And that happens to be, once again, lifestyle. There are other cases too where renting does make more sense than home ownership, and it doesn't always come down to the finances. Flexibility, because the option to leave after a year or two lease is a great feature. It doesn't mean that when you have home ownership that you are actually tied down, as they say, because what is stopping you from putting that property on Airbnb? What is stopping you from renting it out to travel nurses or working professionals? you kind of have the same luxury. Now, granted, not as much and not as much flexibility as renting would provide you, but it is there. As someone who has done both renting and buying, I firmly believe that ownership is more beneficial in the long run than renting is. In the short run, it makes sense to rent if you have no idea what your plans are for the future. However, for me, I really prefer the tax benefits, whether that's depreciation or interest. I like the idea of the equity growing, and I have used equity to purchase future investments, such as rental properties, to then grow my wealth. Also, the concept of passing down these assets to your children, especially once free and clear of a mortgage, that is something that you can't put value on. The idea of passing this down to your future generations. You can't do that when you're renting, and that is just the truth. As someone who has done both renting and buying, I firmly believe that owning is more beneficial in the long run than renting is. I believe that the depreciation, the interest, all those write-offs add up to a lot more value than people are giving credit for. I also believe that when it comes to the equity play, that's a lot more valuable than people lead on as well, because I've personally used the equity in properties to purchase other additional properties that generate me even more income. And there's a value that you can't place on a property being free and clear and the ability to pass it down to future generations. That allows the future generation to then be in a position to be like, you know what, I'm going to rent instead of buy because I already have an asset. I don't have to spend money on a college dorm because I have somewhere to stay. I can pull money out of this property to invest in my business and grow my business because the future generations set me up with this property. That is valuable. I think in the short term, in the grand scheme of things, renting could be more beneficial, especially if you could hunt for a cheaper price and you don't have to deal with some of the maintenance issues, or maybe you want the flexibility. Yes, 1 to 5 years, renting can definitely make sense. But over the long haul, when you consider rental increases, when you consider that there's literally AI out there, such as RealPage, that can change what you pay in rent on the daily, that could cripple you, especially when your salary is not increasing at the same rate that the surveillance pricing is working against you. In the long run, if you're talking about kids, school district, if you're talking about a sense of security, I do believe that home ownership is the better option. I believe when it comes to tax benefits, depreciation, interest write-offs, that is a better option. I believe when it comes to being able to pull money out as equity to then use to purchase other rental properties to generate more income, that is a better option. I believe that if you want to plan for the future, for future generations, pass down these assets, especially if they're free and clear, that is definitely the better option. Let me be clear though, I do not believe that renting is throwing away money, not at all. You need somewhere to live. Everyone needs somewhere to live regardless of your income. Housing is just the cost of shelter. I think if you don't have the financial resources to choose between renting and buying, then when you're renting, you should not feel bad about it. It is part of the game. You should figure out though what you want to do in the future and what your income will look like in the future so you can decide what is better for you, renting or buying. But don't let anyone convince you that owning a home is a bad idea, especially in the market that we're in with such a low housing supply, especially the direction that we're going where rent is continuously to increase and there's becoming less and less available for you to choose from. Because eventually there will be no more land and there'll be a lot less homes on the market trading places between generations. Now, if you're fortunate enough to be in a position where you could do both, right? Renting and buying, then I want you to ask yourself, are you really going to invest the difference? Are you really going to have the discipline to continue to invest, let's say that $500 every month for that 1 to 5 years into the S&P 500? Are you going to stay committed? Ask yourself, is this a financial decision or is this a decision out of fear? Also, ask yourself, what will your life look like in 10 to 15 years? What does stability look like for you and what do you want? Will there be kids involved? Does school district matter? All of these are important when it comes to making the decision between renting and buying because there is no one size that fits all. I'm very curious as to what your thoughts are. Like, do you really still believe that one is better than the other and home ownership is simply just out of the question, not because you can't afford it, simply because you think it is a financial burden to you and your family? Either way, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching if you made it this far, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.